A few days ago, I said the metagame feels better right now than it has since maybe February, maybe even January. So let's talk about some very off-meta decks that top players are using to succeed in High Infinite. First up, from Husky Puppies, a Black Swan Gilgamesh deck that is using Techno-Organic Virus as a secondary points package, and then to prevent other decks from going over the top of it with their combos, a Super Giant Fusion that allows this deck to actually be one of the strongest decks that uses that package in terms of points. It's a really interesting dynamic that has developed in the metagame, and I realize that many people may look at this and say, that's a super giant deck. That's not off meta. This is the most meta this video is getting. So don't worry, we're gonna get there. But the reason I started with this is because I think it's representative of sort of why this is a more open metagame than there previously has been. And it's that if you really want to answer something, the answers can go in a lot of different spaces. There are a lot of decks that can say, I would like to beat Star-Lord and then play Red Guardian and Shang-Chi, or play, a super giant package, right? A lot of different things can be the points package for a deck like this. And that has created a little bit of diversity by virtue of having certain answers be particularly good into a style of deck that currently exists. And that style of deck being the kind of deck that is either an onboard combo that can be disrupted by things that affect the board, and that being the dominant kind of combo deck people are interacting with, means that people can answer that by including things that deal with the board. This is, I think, a bit of an inspired pull from Husky Puppies, and it really goes to prove just how much anything can be good in this shell. Squirrel Girl is not a card that has ever been part of a very reasonable or playable or really anything close to that deck. Gilgamesh has not done that either. But the Supergiant package allows these otherwise underpowered cards to break out of their own shells, to not just be tied to being a Blue Marvel Zoo deck, to not be tied to optimizing the specific text on the card, and instead to adapting the metagame, understanding what you're trying to beat. And I think that is a really good lesson for people to take away from this. You can succeed as long as you respect what other people are doing. And this is a great example of that. These are cards that people, quite frankly, laugh at. And here they are, succeeding. I think many people will be familiar with Cerebro 3, but this Cerebro 5 list from Jay Walla is a particularly interesting direction for the deck to take. And I think a lot of this is down to the specific appeal of Cerebro 5 is that it is the least reliant on Cerebro of all of these decks. The ability to use Ancient One not just for Cerebro, but also for things like Ms. Marvel is particularly powerful. This is the only Cerebro deck that gets access to things like Juggernaut and like Negasonic, and frankly, I remember in my Fautier video, I was like, they should take Supergiant down a point of power. If they take Supergiant down a point of power, I am playing C5 Supergiant. Like, I'm actually just going to do that, so maybe they shouldn't. But this is the kind of thing that allows a deck to actually succeed. One of the biggest problems with Cerebro decks is that the incentives of the card are to play a lot of small things and make them really big. But that leads you to creating decks that are fundamentally kind of imbalanced and can only succeed when you draw Cerebro. This deck maintains the kind of combo output that Cerebro is known for by being able to Ancient One a Cerebro onto a bunch of other stuff, but also manages to include some reasonable and powerful interactive cards. Luke Cage Mysterio here is doing the same work that it would in other decks. You've seen this combo show up in the Aurora deck that I highlighted recently as well. 2 5s is a very powerful thing to have, and Cerebro wants to run Luke Cage anyway. This is a significant upgrade here, and we get to have a lot of reasonable power output while not giving up on any really powerful interactive cards. Juggernaut and Negasonic are that good. This is a deck that can win without Cerebro because of the power of the interactive cards and the stats it puts on the board. It can play an Aurora-like game plan, but it can also just go over the top of you in ways that Aurora maybe can't. It's hard being a Phantom X gamer. It feels like you're sort of perennially relegated to this space in the metagame, but Phantom X is the kind of deck that if you are a clever player with it, you can still see some success with in this kind of build. This is from Derek. It's very similar to the old KM Worst Ethical Hella build, and I realize that's a bit of a confusing name. The idea here is basically you are functionally a Hella deck. What you're doing is you're just doing points in the most overpowering possible ways. A points deck that has a bunch of tricks in it is a pretty reasonable space for any deck to be in, and this is definitely that kind of deck. Now, this is also a metagame that is notably lighter on Cosmo than it was only a little bit ago, which sounds like a bit of a crazy thing to say because Cosmo is still one of the most played cards in the game, but at about 18% at High Infinite, according to Untapped, where previously it was notably higher. This is a very interesting list that I think does a lot more points than people are willing to respect, but is ultimately one of those lists that is the kind of deck that people are able to build to beat. You run into some problems when you're counting on things like not getting Cosmic Ghost Rider. You can go point for point with a Doom 2099 though, like you really can. You just have to be aware of the things that are going to negatively impact you when you play a deck like this. But this is the kind of deck that can go not just point for point with a Doom 2099, but specifically spike 2 lanes in terms of power in a way that is particularly relevant. Marrow is a card that has really grown on me recently. I have been increasingly impressed with what Marrow does in these decks to the degree that I'm not sure any of them would exist without her, but she is a phenomenally powerful card. The Bucky Barnes of being discarded. Just a better card than him in basically every way. I am really impressed with her in these lists, and a lot of your ability to catch people off guard comes from them maybe not accounting for her later in the game, or you being able to take priority by discarding her early in the game so they can't do Cosmo or mess up your stuff before it happens. A lot of that stuff is relevant in this deck. She's a very powerful tool, and this deck, again, it does points really, really efficiently. My one real play tip here is if you're worried about getting Cosmoed and armored and things like that, you do not have to all in a lane. You don't need to have Uncle Ben and Bucky Barnes in the same lane. You can take your time and set those up in different lanes and then get to them as they go if you're worried about your opponent interacting with you. From Cougar, the V-Hand Dakin list is an attempt to inject some verticality into a deck that is typically a deck that struggles with verticality. Victoria Hand traditionally is the kind of deck that is not particularly able to pick 2 locations and go very tall on them. The addition of the Dakin Bullseye combo means that you are suddenly much more able to do that. Dakin Frigga with Grandmaster, Bullseye in there somewhere. You are going to be making a lot of large, powerful men. And that kind of thing is a very viable strategy. Now, you do lose out on a bit of the interaction that can typically go in a list like this, but you are still a Gambit deck. You do have the ability to pivot to being a Gambit deck fully if that is what happens. One of the cards that I think is particularly important here, just in terms of making it easier for you to play the game, I've really enjoyed Surge. You just don't really have a 2 that you can play on 2 that is not named Surge in this deck unless you're playing V-Hand into Frigga. And so the games when you have Surge feel so much better than the games that don't, because you also don't really have too many cards in the deck that you don't want to play or you are unwilling to play. The other thing this deck gets to do is play both Gambits and sometimes copies of both Gambits, and that is a powerful enough thing that it can disrupt other decks just off the ability to remove their things from the board. So unlike a normal V-Hand deck, this deck is a little bit less consistent, but the highs are very high. Your Dakin plays are extremely powerful. You have multi-Gambit lines that allow you to be a very potent list into a wide variety of situations. Your big worry are just the combo decks that go taller than you, largely. When you're looking down the barrel of a Star-Lord, you're kind of just looking at normal Gambit in your hand, and you're saying, please win the 50-50 on this, because otherwise I am just going to get got here. That kind of stuff is notable. You are not able to stay on 6 against Star-Lord if they have priority. They will probably Goliath you a bunch. It will be pretty difficult to handle. But largely what this deck is trying to do is position itself such that it is bigger than the V-hand decks people are playing. It is going to be able to beat them by going taller. It is going to have interaction for other mid-rangey decks with both of the gambits that it plays and the ability to copy its stuff. And it will generally have a sort of big mid-range or small combo feel to it, kind of similar to a bounce deck. Next up is a buff Galacti list from Jay Walla, which is playing a very normal game plan and then just using the Zombie Galacti as an intensifier on top of what is otherwise a fairly reasonable and coherent points package, right? Like, this is the kind of deck that is just like, here's a bunch of like actually good cards, and then we have Majestic Wingbeat, we have Hope Summers, and we have Superior Spider-Man, all of which will allow us to hit the Zombie Galacti. The Zombie Galacti, maybe it's not the world's greatest card, but we hit like a Maverick on it. That Maverick got hit by an Elsa Bloodstone. It also gets an Elsa Bloodstone trigger, and suddenly a lot of our small guys go from being like 4, 3, 5 hour to being things that are, you know, maybe gonna be 7 or 9 or 11 or 13. And that is really the sort of fundamental premise here. It's an interesting take on the list that is much less devoted to all-in combo and much more willing to use it as the ability to position itself to go over other mid-range decks. And I think that, you know, we talked about this in the context of the previous list, which is the V-hand list with Dak and stuff in it. This is it's not actually, in my opinion, it's not actually a Zombie Galacti list. It's like an Elsa Bloodstone tempo list with a Zombie Galacti in it. Like, that's the part that's been grafted on the back end. And frankly, of every Zombie Galacti list that I've ever seen, this is the one that excites me the most. And I think longtime viewers will know why. Because there isn't a freaking magic in it. There's no magic in here. I hate playing magic. I hate leaving whether or not I'm going to be able to play the turn 7 up to my opponents. I hate being bully snapped out of games because I played a magic. I know she's good against Star-Lord, but I hate playing her. And so this is a really interesting way to sort of, one of my sort of guiding principles is what is like the minimal investment I can put in to receive the maximum outcome. That's sort of how I approach deck building. And when I look at this, I see min investment Galacti that is still going to buff every single card I play. This is going to serve as like the aurora of this deck. And I think that's actually pretty fascinating. I obviously would not be surprised if it's just better to do this shell with Show Lao. That is wholly unsurprising to me. I would totally believe it. But I do think that this is a very interesting application of Zombie Galacti that I was previously not particularly aware of. Also, Mysterio's a little bit inspired because Mysterio will turn into the Galacti, and then you gave all the power to the other Mysterio, which is just like, oh, I'm free rolling. I'm free rolling this. This is just actually free power. I think that's kind of cute too. Last up, there is a player in High Infinite that I won't say I track, but like I do take note of. His name is Tommy. He's a bit of a Black Knight one trick. For a bit, he was playing Phantom X as well. But part of why I track him is because Black Knight is a deck that is not particularly relevant in a sort of combo era of Marvel Snap. So when Tommy is actually able to indulge in his fascination with Black Knight, I feel like maybe the metagame is moving to a different spot. This was like the first week in a while that he was like, I can play Black Knight and I don't feel like a complete idiot, which is, again, just sort of more evidence for my thesis that, like, yeah, the metagame has some problems, but this is about as good as it's been since, like, either January or February. I said February. I later discussed it with a couple other players who said January. I don't know if I'd go that far, but I definitely think since Star-Lord released, this is about as good as the metagame has been, maybe since Show Lao released. And a lot of that, maybe it's just people getting bored. Maybe the cards are more balanced than they're given credit for. Maybe less people are playing than they're giving credit for. But all I can tell you is that this kind of stuff is more playable. And maybe it's just that we're used to what it means to retreat for one. Maybe we've just all sort of baked in the retreat for ones. And they're like, well, that would happen regardless of how good of a deck I played. And this probably wouldn't hold up in a tournament environment. Who knows? But largely, this is a deck that is doing some fairly interesting stuff in the Black Knight space. It is capped on output, but it is notable that it is able to, again, just like sort of randomly succeed thanks to being a Shang-Chi deck. Like, this is the kind of deck where it's like, your opponent's playing Star-Lord. They're like, look at this idiot. He's playing Black Knight Redshift. I'm going to play a Star-Lord. I'm going to snap him. You Shang-Chi him. You have a Negasonic. You can do stuff about that. You have Shang-Chi, you have Cosmic Ghost Rider. As long as you have priority going into the Star-Lord turn, they lose. And I think this is really the thing I'm kind of getting at here, where it's like almost any mid-range shell that is packing a plan for the matchup. It doesn't even really have to be a good plan. It's just like a plan. You will be able to beat them, and not only that, take advantage of their confidence in their gameplay. They will be like, I'm doing it. I'm the greatest player of all time. I drew Star-Lord and I played Psylocke on turn 3. Look at how smart I am. I skipped energy on turn 3 and then I get to play Star-Lord on 4. I'm the smartest man alive. I'm going to snap this person, and then they lose instantly because they try to Arnim Zola a card that has no text or a card that isn't there. And that is just a powerful enough mechanic that kind of a lot of mid-range decks can skate on it, because Star-Lord is more played than Sho Lao right now. Like, there's like about 10% of the metagame is Star-Lord, a little less, maybe about 7% is Sho Lao, and you just kind of beat them. Like, you just kind of beat them. And if that's what you're worried about, well, then you just get to play mid-range, right? Like, if the reason you're not playing mid-range is because you're afraid of Star-Lord, we can solve that now. We got it. Speaking of solving it, Second Dinner did release a message in relation to the fact that there is a Star-Lord bundle on the web shop. They said that they would be weakening Star-Lord in the upcoming OTA. So I'm just going to tell everyone now, you should not buy anything until the OTA. If you are sitting here like, I would like a replacement for whatever, I want to go buy X. Is X worth it? Is this card that none of these cards are worth it? Wait until the OTA, because that will determine the context that you will be playing these cards in. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I've been KMBest. You've been phenomenal, and I'll see you in the next one. Can't believe I hit the mic there.